interesting polling commentary from Biden's pollster, John Anzalone. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. There was a lot here in this conversation. I actually listened to the whole thing this morning. Written up in Politico Playbook. Biden's pollster, who came up with his winning strategy in the 2020 election, says this is now the worst political environment for Democrats of my lifetime. There was a lot here that he said. And Anzalone, so here's his deal. He really sees himself as like coming from the white working class, kind of a DC outsider, even though he really is a DC insider. He lives in Alabama. Right now he's working on a race in Nevada. He sees himself as like separate and apart from this sort of DC chattering class. And his commentary tends to be like, it's that sort of thing where he'll say a lot of things and you're like, yeah, this guy gets it, this guy gets it. And then he'll say one thing where you're like, wait, what? That totally contradicts everything else that you just said. So that's kind of who he is. He really came up with not just Biden's general election strategy, also the primary strategy. He had this idea of, all right, you can sort of ride out Iowa, New Hampshire, and even Nevada, even though no one's ever done that before, and we'll make it all about South Carolina and Super Tuesday. Of course, he had the assistance of the media coming in for Joe, everybody dropping out, Barack Obama intervening, et cetera, et cetera. But he really sort of saw how those chips were ultimately going to fall. So, few things that he said here that were very noteworthy. First of all, on his prediction for 2022, he says it's the worst political environment I've lived through in 30 years of being a political consultant. And there's a big difference between losing 7 and 10 seats in the House and getting your ass kicked and losing 35 to 40. He believes they might still have the ability to keep the Senate. I think the only thing that could possibly save them at this point is if the Republicans nominate a bunch of like completely unelectable people, which they have the possibility. They've proven themselves able to do before. You can see, Todd Aiken and Roy Moore if you need a reminder of how that ultimately goes. He also says what Democrats need to do is, number one, voters are always asking, what have you done for me lately? And he decries the fact that on economics, Democrats really haven't delivered. It says they really need to get something done, whether it's a skinny Build Back Better or something that actually speaks to voters' concerns. Imagine that crazy idea. Yeah. He also says that they need to lean into a populist message on taxes. He says we're scared of our own shadow on taxes, and it effing makes no sense. People do not begrudge people making a lot of money and getting wealthy. People have a problem and are pissed off about them not paying any effing taxes. And why, as a party, we don't elevate that in our messaging is beyond me. The last part of this that I thought was really interesting is he talks about the myth of Latino voters and says something that should be obvious to literally any human being, which is he says, listen, in DC among Democrats, they think you only talk to Latinos about immigration. Like, immigration is the 12th issue they're concerned about. Guess what? They're concerned about the same things everyone else is concerned about. It's about the economy or inflation or healthcare or schools. So, what I would say to all of this, because then he goes on to have some commentary that's in line with like, the left is the problem. Well, you've just outlined something here in the tax the rich messaging that comes directly out of the left flank of the party and is being stymied by the corporatist moderate wing of the party. And so I think he's absolutely right in the fact that there are obvious directions that Democrats could go in to seize the messaging and put Republicans in a very difficult spot. And they just don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the cultural left is the problem. But, I mean, they're dominant amongst the establishment left, which is part of this why they're so unpopular. It's like when you have cultural leftism and then terrible economic policy.
Well, this is what always irritates me is there's no ability to separate out the culture left policy and economic left policy.
100%. Yeah. I don't disagree with you. And what's interesting, too, about what he says is that Republicans do a much better job of branding Democrats than Democrats do of Republicans. We don't do a good job of branding. And it's interesting because what they try to do is brand Republicans as cultural extremists, when in reality, they're more than enough today in 2022. They're like roughly dead center, at least when you compare it to what the dominant cultural liberalism is. It's on economics that they're all the way out here at like 12%. And yet, when you don't do a good enough job of talking about that and putting them in those types of positions, you're getting outflanked on the economy and on inflation. It's like no wonder the Steve Moore FreedomWorks definition of deficit reduction inflation is being accepted by the broad majority of the American people, when Biden himself has just no ability to articulate or do anything whenever it comes to the most pressing concerns. I mean, people should remember too, we've seen some fluctuation in gas price right now. It has zero to do with Joe Biden. what it has to do is China is locking down, and so global demand is down, and so gas is slightly down. I was talking with Rory Johnson, the guy we had on the show. He's like, yeah, there's been no structural change to U.S. oil markets by the Biden administration under this since this crisis has begun. That's crazy. It's almost 2 months to the day since Russia invaded Ukraine. 2 months can sound like a short time, but you can get a lot done if you want to. You know, people forget, this country changed in just 100 days under the FDR. There were 15 major pieces of legislation. Go back in time. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed after an 83-day filibuster. That's not that long. Same with Medicare, the Great Society, Social Security, the history of these programs. They were conceived of and enacted in a quick environment because people had a real strategic vision and grand vision for the country itself. Biden doesn't have any of that. They just released some new rule on federal leasing and lands. It's complicated. It's bureaucratic. Nobody really understands it. In terms of its impact on the oil market, it may have one 9 months from now.
Right.
What are you doing? This is the point.
Well, and here's the thing is it's very hard for you to blame the left when the left has no power. Like, you all are in charge. This entire program, the entire economic program, the entire strategic program, the entire rhetorical program, this all comes out of Bill Clinton, DLC. I mean, it's the same old in charge of the party. None of that has changed. So it's like, no matter who's in charge, no matter what they do, they always want to say, oh, it's the fault of the left. You all have all the power here. The left is completely impotent and has proved themselves that time and time again. So if it's the worst political environment of your lifetime, and it's your dude who's in charge, and it's your guy who's running the Senate, and it's your gal who's running the House, like, when are you ever going to do a little bit of soul searching and say, hey, maybe we need to rethink how we're ultimately approaching things here? Because yeah, listen, as we've talked about on the show a million times, if you don't deliver for people materially, if you basically put that off the table, then of course politics is going to be all about the culture war. Of course, Republicans are excellent at prosecuting their culture war case. That is not the landscape that you ultimately want to be fighting on. But because Biden has basically broken his promises to every core constituency within the Democratic Party base, then you end up with this worst of all worlds where, of course, the right is highly motivated to come out and vote in the midterms. And just as Obama did to the Democratic base, you've totally depressed the Democratic base. Something I think I'm going to do my monologue on for tomorrow is in this recent poll that just came out that had Biden's approval at 33%, was it 33% in Quinnipiac? His approval rating with young voters was lower than Trump's was in the same poll during his presidency at the same time. Yeah. And I want people to understand that doesn't mean like, oh, Republicans are picking up young voters. No, young voters are disgusted. They're much more ideologically in line, closer to the Democratic Party's ideals. They're not like interested in either the Republican cultural positions or the Republican economic positions, but they're completely disgusted with Democrats. So they're not going to show up. I mean, you see the same thing. I'm still following the French election. You see very similar dynamic there where young people are like, the entire attitude of the Democratic Party establishment is complete contempt and like disgust with the young base of the party that was supposed to be the future, that was supposed to be the coalition of the ascendant. So when you consistently screw over your base, when you don't deliver for independents, when Republicans are highly motivated, yeah, you're gonna end up getting your ass kicked.
Yeah, no, I think they're in a real bind here. And they're so impotent. They are, first of all, we talked about on the foreign crisis. People either feel like he's not doing enough or hasn't done enough, so there's no support for his handling of Ukraine. On the economy, it's a disaster. Inflation, higher. He's not taking on corporate profits, not putting on markups, not lowering gas prices. Doesn't seem generally focused on the issues that you care about. Recipe for a complete rout, and he deserves it. There really is no other way to say it.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah.
You are lying in a bed of your own making.
That is very true. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.